And that was the biggest revelation, right? That like you could go after something you've always wanted and you could fail spectacularly, but it doesn't break you. And that was the beginning of really living my life brave, not perfect.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Over the Wall. I'm LoCascio, and today I'm here with Reshma Saujani. She is the CEO and founder of Girls Who Code. Amazing person. And she's got a podcast, Brave Not Perfect, and a book out of the same name. And when you read this book, and I have a daughter, a 4-year-old daughter, it just really digs into, women living your dreams and some of the challenges with that. So I really want to thank you for being on the program and welcome.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So I read the book and it starts with this story of you running for political office, right? And and maybe you can talk a little about it, but you talked about this. There was a moment where you first became brave. And I thought it was such a great story. So maybe if we can just start there, that would be awesome.
Yeah. My parents came here as refugees. And from the time I was little, my dad would always read to me about these change makers. And so I thought I wanted to be a public servant because that was the way that I could really bring about change. And I graduated like $300,000 in student loan debt. And so I thought I'd get a job at a fancy law firm and I'd pay off that debt in like a year or two. And then I could like go do what I'm really meant to do. Well, I'm sure you know how that panned out, right? And 10 years later, I'm still in this job that I hate, right? Basically in a life I didn't want. And I finally worked up the courage to just quit that job. And I decided to run for Congress. And I decided to run in a Democratic primary against an incumbent who had been there for 18 years. So I basically did what LoCascio did, except she won and I lost. But 10 years ago when I did it, I was the only challenger in the country. I mean, this was like a no-no. But for some reason, I thought I could like meet every voter, shake every hand, and, convince people to vote for me. And I had no idea what I was doing. Like, I remember we raised like $50,000 from Indian aunties, the first week that were just so happy an Indian girl was running. Because, oh, by the way, I was the first Indian American woman to run for United States Congress. And so it was like an uphill battle, but like the best 10 months of my life. And on election day, like I swore I was going to win, like, for sure. I didn't even have a concession speech in my purse, but I got crushed, less than 19% of the vote. I was broke because I had put my savings that I had, the pennies that I had saved from all the student loans I still had to pay into this race. I was humiliated, right? Because when you lose for public office, everybody knows that you lost. I made a heck of a lot of enemies, right? 10 years later, Congressman Maloney still hates me.
Because you basically, the incumbent was supposed to step down and then last minute
decided not to.
Right, and now you didn't even like right. you were brought into.
And of course, that was my signal to like not run, but I didn't know any better.
They wanted you to drop out, right?
People
in the party like get out, stop. Like we don't, and then you were like, no, I'm not going to stop, which took a lot of guts.
Yeah, and I lost, but it didn't break me, and that was the biggest revelation, right? That like you could go after something you've always wanted, and you could fail spectacularly, but it doesn't break you. And that was the beginning of really living my life brave, not perfect.
So what was the next thing you did? And how do you get to the organization that you built, Girls Who Code, which is an extraordinary organization? Give me the connected dots.
Yeah. So, after I lost, I was like, I'm not going back to the private sector. I want to make change. And of all the problems that I saw on the campaign trail, like what's the one that really moved me? And it was girls in coding. And the weird thing was like, I wasn't a coder. It wasn't like I experienced this in college or, working at a tech company and let me go solve this problem. It was really this like, where are the girls? Like, I don't get it. Like there's all these jobs in coding and technology and why aren't girls sitting around the table? And you can make a lot of money, like $120,000. Like where are the girls? And so I, for 2 years, just every day after work, or on my summer vacation, on my weekends, would try to solve that problem. And so I would meet really smart people like technologists or PhDs or educators, girls, everybody and said, and so I learned about what the problem was. And I had an idea about a possible intervention because the problem that I heard from so many people was like, I want to hire talented women and people of color. I just can't find them. So then the solution was, well, let me build the biggest tech talent pipeline, right? And it's very hard to create an intervention in the school day, right? Because you and I have been taking the same classes that our grandparents our grandparents have been taking. But like, people are always looking for things for their kids to do over the summer. And so maybe I can design a summer coding camp for girls. And that's how I will teach hundreds of thousands of millions of girls. And that was what became Girls Who Code. And now 10 years later, we've taught 450,000 girls have gone through one of our programs. We've reached 500 million students, and we've built the largest pipeline of talented women.
So let's first, before I want to go into some of the things, talk about perfectionism and that, but I would like to talk to you as an entrepreneur, and as a woman entrepreneur. We've had a few, more than a few on the show, and I always like to ask the question, like, do you find it tougher as a woman being an entrepreneur, and you had this idea and going out in the world and, doing the things you need to do to get the organization where it is today? Like, maybe that first year, what was it like? Because a lot of times what we talk about on the show is that it's not just from idea to success. Like, you had to change something. You had to go out. You had to attract people. So can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, I mean, listen. So I have built 10 years later the largest women and girls organization probably in the world. I've raised $100 million in 9 years. And so from an entrepreneur perspective, it's probably one of the biggest female startups. What I learned at the idea phase is that I think ideas are infectious. And I was this young woman who had an idea. I didn't have a product, right? I had a model in my head that I needed seed money to design and to deliver on. And so I would go into dinner parties or meetings or hustle and send emails, and I would pitch my idea. And, my first 3 funders, one was Jack Dorsey. Jack and I had met when we were kids. I remember he handed me his first Square. Biggest regret of my life, right? Not investing in that at inception, or else, things would look really different in my life. But he always for the past 10 years just saw something in me, saw something in my ideas. So he was the first person who was like, all right, I'll give you a little bit of money and Twitter's backing, And the second person was Beth Comstock, who at that time was the CMO of GE. You just happened to be sitting next to her at a dinner party, and we started talking. She's like, come see me. And then she was like, I was interviewing her for a book I was writing. And she's like, well, what are you working on? I was like, well, I got this idea about Girls and Coach. I love it. Like, when you're ready, tell me. I'll send you a check. And same thing with Rochelle Parham, who at that time was the CMO of eBay. And so I kind of met these really prominent women and men that were, that had a little bit of money to give me. But what they really gave me were their names and their companies' names. And that really brought a lot of gravitas, right, to this idea at a moment when the world was ready for it.
So that's how you did it. So you basically, it's like you were out there, but Jack, you found Jack because you have a childhood friend, or that's
just like my husband met him at probably a tech party, and then we ended up meeting, and it was like one of those. I came from a working class background, went to public schools my whole life. Like, I didn't know rich people, but one of the skill sets that I had learned working in democratic politics was raising money. So the good thing about being a campaign or a candidate is you got to ask people and you got to sell yourself.
Yeah.
So that is my gift, right? Like, and I have no shame, right? So I will hustle you, move you, inspire you about something that I really believed in this idea. And so, I got a handful of people early, and, the first program that we put together really worked. And I think the second thing I learned as an entrepreneur, and I learned this by having a boss who was exactly the opposite. I had a boss who was just very intimidated by anybody who was smarter than him. And so he refused to bring people on his team, and he would never really then succeeded. And so I saw him, and I was like, I'm not going to be that way. And so when I built Girls Who Code, I found the best in class. So I'm not a coder. So great. I need to find a computer scientist. I'm not an educator. I need to find an educator. I need to find people who are going to put this program together, but I know how to organize. and I know I can recruit my first 20 girls, and I know I can raise money. And so like I was clear about what I could do, and then I was bringing people into the team to basically, solve for what I didn't know how to do. And I was very honest about that. And I think that was also very key.
So when you when you think about the program's called Over the Wall, because we always think about like, can you think about in those early days some walls you had to? So far, it seems like you raised a lot of money really quickly. You attracted a lot of great people, obviously very successful. But were there some walls or some you encountered as an entrepreneur?
I also think that, like, I think sometimes as an entrepreneur, and I've stopped doing this, but it's like you want to get buy-in. So some of those meetings that I had early on, I remember there was this guy, prominent VC, who was like, "That's a horrible idea. Like, girls never want to learn how to code," and had lots of lots of examples. And I walked out of that meeting, and old Reshma, pre-congressional candidate Reshma would have been like, I shouldn't do this. New Brave Not Perfect Reshma was like, F yeah, like I'm doing this for sure now, right? Because I'm going to prove him wrong. So, that was, a gift, but like, a definite hurdle I had to cross. The other thing was, I wasn't a CEO. I had never built a nonprofit before. At that time, I had never managed more than a handful of people. So I also I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning, And the smart thing though I did was I had a board of directors who really believed in me. So when they knew they're like, okay, let's hire an HR person. Okay, let's hire this person, right? Let's surround her around people that will allow her to be a visionary. And I think a lot of CEOs, especially I think female CEOs, sometimes get into trouble because they don't they don't do that, or their board doesn't help them figure that out. And so, and that's, I think, becomes a detriment later on.
Why do you think it's female CEO? Like you just said, you were like, why do you think?
Because I think that we have very different expectations. I think oftentimes, like I early on, like, am I your mother? Am I your best friend? And like, who am I to you? Who do you want me to be to you? Right. And so we have a lot of feelings about women leaders. And I think that women do, men do, society does. And so we're held to a very different bar and a very different standard. And you kind of need someone who's been through that to coach you through it.
What's standard? So what do you think that bar and standard is? So you're saying, so what do you think, if you define that, what do you think that is?
Look, I joke. I mean, like my husband, who's, a serial entrepreneur, it's like he'll go, order drinks and play beer pong, right, with his employees. I don't do that.
Gotcha.
And so it's also like, I think for lots of times as women, because we've been socialized to be perfect and we want people to like us, we often don't make hard decisions. We don't fail. We don't fire quickly enough, or we don't tell the honest truth about feedback because we don't want to hurt your feelings, and that becomes a detriment. You know what I mean? Later on. So in some ways, creating a little bit of separation sometimes is important.
So how did you train yourself? Because I think this is great for women entrepreneurs, women CEOs that are out there. You really have to train your mindset to be very different than what you're saying is by nature.
Yes.
Is what the mindset would be. So was it just through, I guess, coming up into situations and seeing it's not working for you, you start to rework your brain? And if you could give people, like women, 4 or 5, these are things that we do normally that I did differently, or I learned to do differently, and it served me to be where I am today, what would those be?
Well, I think that I would say the first thing is I put a team of peers around me that I could actually be my sounding board and sometimes be really myself around. So I'm intense. I have really high expectations. I work harder than probably anybody you've ever met. And I expect that. And, I grew up with, my Asian parents. When I lost my first election, my dad sent me like a message of the top 10 things I did wrong. So it is not my nature to like pat you on the back and be like, great job, right? Like, for doing your job.
Yeah.
But I've learned as I've evolved that people need that. Yeah. Especially junior staff. And so, I think one is recognizing who on your team are your peers and you can actually be you around, and then who do you have on your team that is actually the person who can do some of that, some of that maneuvering or massaging, that you need to do to like build a team and build a culture. And I think that is very, very, very clear and very honest. I think secondly, it's like, I also learned how to basically fire people quickly and fast. Jack really taught me that, as I learned from him, and we talked about what's the biggest lesson that you had. And I think sometimes, our nature, because we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings,
Right.
is we put people on, and then we give them another chance, and then another chance, and then another chance. And we already knew what we knew in month one. And the thing that I also learned, it's not just about like, if life is about finding your purpose and building the thing that's going to say, well, what did God put me on this earth to do? You want that person to find that too. And so if you already know that that's not their purpose, don't keep them there.
Right.
Like, break up and let them find the thing that they're meant to do too. And I think that was something that I had to learn.
You talk about the idea of perfectionism. And, we talk on the show a lot about mental obstacles around business entrepreneurship, being founders. And then you said, this is one of the biggest things that hinders young girls. It's like the psychological hurdle to moving forward. Maybe you can unpack that a little bit for the audience.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I always say is like, go to any playground in America and you'll see what I'm talking about. Or quite frankly, our house world. And the thing is, from an early on, we're telling our boys to climb to the top of the monkey bars and just jump. But for our girls, it's like, be careful, honey. Don't swing too high. Did you take that toy away from her? And so what we're doing at the youngest of possible ages, and maybe you do this with your daughter, is we're wrapping them up in bubble wrap. And it starts in the beginning because we're trying to physically protect them from harm. We don't want them to get physically hurt. With our boys, it's different. Like I have two sons, and I watch my husband just like push my 2-year-old over just for fun. You know what I mean? And I know what he's doing.
Yeah.
He's trying to toughen him up, right? He's trying to make him strong. And so with our daughters, we're physically protecting them. And then around 8 or 9, it extends into emotional protection. And what will happen is your daughter will go to gymnastics class. She will not be able to do a cartwheel. She'll come home and she'll cry and she'll say, Daddy, I'm horrible at gymnastics. And you'll say, don't worry, baby. Let's try soccer tomorrow. And so what happens with our daughters is they never feel rejection. They never feel failure, right? With our boys, it's a completely different situation. We're constantly trying to get them, oh, you're not good at that? All right, you're going to go tomorrow. You're going to go twice, right? And you're going to stay there. And I don't care. And don't complain about it. Don't cry about it, right? I mean, how many times have you heard, even walking down the street, people say, what are you crying? Stop crying, right? And so it's this constant training, and it's very unconscious. When my son, when he was a couple years old, was afraid of the dark, I went and bought the nightlight. And I would take Sean upstairs and I'd plug in that nightlight. And then 2 minutes later, I'd hear my husband coming up and he'd take out that nightlight. And Sean would scream and we would do this thing. And after a while, I said to my husband, my house, my feminist husband, what are you doing? And he was like, we gotta toughen him up, And I said, Nahal, if Sean was a girl, would you let him have the nightlight? And to his credit, he was like, yeah. So it's the way we've been raised, and it's the way we're raising our kids. And so what happens to girls is they get addicted to perfection. And what that means is they start learning how to give up before they even try. And they affirmation is important to them. Right. So they stay in jobs that they're, don't really like. They stay in relationships that they don't want to be in. They don't go for whether it's running for office or starting a business or doing your blog or raising your hand for that promotion or even raising your hand to ask a question in a meeting, because if you can't execute it or do it perfectly, why bother at all? One of the ways you see this, when I started Girls Who Code, probably in my first speech, I said, I'm going to teach 1 million girls to code. I had no idea how to teach 1 million girls to code. I still haven't taught 1 million girls to code, right? I didn't care, because I knew if I said something big, people would be like, oh, I'm in. I want to teach 1 million girls to code. Every time I've invested in a guy, even if he's selling like this, who knows what this, right? He has $1 billion slide at the end of his deck. He is going to tell you how he's going to make you $1 billion. When I invest in women, they never have $1 billion slide, because they're like, I'm like, where's your $1 billion slide? I don't know if I can't exactly calculate how I'm going to get there. I'm like, I don't care. Put it in there, right?
So make the $1 billion slide. So that's a good piece of advice. Like, make the $1 billion slide. Make the big wow slide. Get your brain out of the small, put it into the future of big.
Yes. And that is, again, innately, I think, about gender, right? Because the reason why we don't have the $1 billion slide is because we want to be perfect. And if we can't tell you exactly how we're going to make $1 billion, we're not going to put it in. It's why women apply for a job only if they meet 100% of the qualifications, and for men it's 60. And so for men, it's like they fake it till they make it all the time. It's like they've been to 1 million yoga classes, right? It's like they got it. We don't know how to do that. We haven't been taught to do that.
I'm not trying to make a sidetrack, but this whole Elizabeth Holmes thing with her company, and I felt like, from what I was reading and watching the movies, I just felt like if she was Steve Jobs, which everyone said she tried to be Steve Jobs, the way she dressed and all this stuff, but I almost feel like if she was just a normal guy entrepreneur, it would have been like, oh, she went for it, kind of didn't work. Instead, it's like she's a criminal, like a woman going big and thinking like she could change the world. And if she failed, like most entrepreneurs, I was like, she just failed. And obviously she was obsessed with it. But I almost felt like, I don't know how you feel. I feel like it was like,
look at the comparison to the WeWork CEO.
Right. He was still not right. Exactly.
He gets $1 billion. She gets put in jail.
She gets put, right. I was trying to figure, and I don't mean to be like, I don't know what you think about that, man. I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, I mean, I look, I mean, the facts are not great for her, right? In terms of like the consequences for people in their lives. But like, I think generally speaking, I think women are held to much harsher, standards. And I see this in my world in politics. I mean, the scrutiny that Kamala or Hillary or Elizabeth Warren, all of them, go under is different. I mean, I'm seeing this in the mayor's race right now here in New York City. And I think part of we have to basically take a step back. And I think we know why. I think, again, goes back to you really, as a female CEO, you can't make a mistake, especially when it comes to likability, right? Because you will get the consequences for not being likable as a female CEO are much greater than they are for a male CEO. And so you constantly have to maneuver that. And that is very hard, right, to do. And it doesn't mean like, don't be an asshole. That's easy, but even when, you're not raising your voice, but you're, you know what I mean? Like there's a much, much, much higher price to pay. And so it's something that you have to, again, constantly navigate, and have people around you who understand that and who are going to, for lack of a better word, protect you.
Huh. So surround yourself. You think you need to surround yourself on the protect you? What do you mean by that?
I mean, what I mean by that is essentially is like, if you have a visionary CEO who's female,
yes,
right? And that she is going to face much more scrutiny for everything that she does. And she's not an asshole. She's not yelling at anybody. She's not, doing anything that is morally wrong, unconscionable, or undecent, right? But again, like when she says, I'd like this now, that is like she yelled at me, right? When in any other world, it would not be seen as like the exact as the same thing. It's like, how do you, as a board, as a team, recognize and solve for that?
So you said during the pandemic, I was reading someplace that you think this idea of perfectionism has got sort of accentuated or something, right? There's some sense of that what's your sense of where we are today with that and women and the sense and what's happened? And then you talk about moms, and then we'll connect to that and what you're trying to get. But let's start there.
This is kind of what I'm talking about female CEOs. Like, I think we want them to be perfect. We want to really like them. We want them to be strong, but not too strong. We want to know about their lives, but not too much about their lives. Like, we want that. It's this constant, right, maneuvering. And, you see this again with all levels of leadership. And I think moms face this in their homes. It was an interesting year because I think for a lot of moms, they had to do their job full time while they homeschooled their kids, did all the laundry, did all the shopping, had a happy face. They forget about them being scared that they were going to die, right? They had to basically run the team and lead the team, and do it all with a smile on your face.
Yeah.
And I think that, and at the same time, you're getting messages, right? Like bake some banana bread. I was so appalled this Mother's Day about how every brand got it so wrong. It was like, give mom a pair of sneakers. She's a superhero. Thank her for all of her pain this year. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, don't make me apologize to me, right? Like, or take some stuff off my plate. But we really have this very complicated and just wrong image of women and strong women, mothers and CEOs, people who are leading things, whether you're leading your house or you're leading a billion-dollar company. And we just get it wrong. And I think oftentimes we see these images or these brands or these commercials or these magazines, and we say, gosh, am I supposed to feel that way? Am I supposed to behave that way? And there's no space for any authenticity and realness and honesty about how hard it is.
So during I think you called for President Biden to give $2,400 or something. This Marshall Plan.
Yes, moms deserve a check.
Right. So, I mean, maybe talk a little bit about that. And you just talked about, like, it's been a lot of women are leaving the workforce during the pandemic. They got the kids at home, they have working, and it's like, it almost feels like it's at a crisis.
It is at a crisis. I mean, Rob, when we started the pandemic, 51% of the labor force was female. So for the first time in the history of our country, more than half of the women in the more than half of those in the workforce were women. Today, our labor market participation is where it was in 1989. So we lost 30 years of progress in like 9 months. So if people went to work, it would feel like the 1960s in terms of seeing women around. And, that happened because, again, schools were closed and many people, you had to essentially use schools as daycare centers. And so when schools were closed and daycare centers were shut and you couldn't invite your parents into your home to take care of your children, and we had to maintain our full-time jobs while, for me, I was homeschooling a 5-year-old and logging him out on Zoom at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and 11 o'clock while I had a newborn baby, running the largest women and girls organization in the world. It was insane. And so, every woman kind of found, so they didn't choose to leave the workforce. They were pushed out.
Right.
And remember that the December jobs report came out and all the jobs. And so I think for a lot of, I was like, well, where's the plan? Right? Like, you can't lose this many jobs this quickly and just think that the minute we have a vaccine, everyone's going to go back. And I felt that in particular because, as a CEO of Girls Who Code, what we forget is that, today, less than 22% of the technology workforce is female, but we were almost at 40% in the 1980s. And since the 1980s, we've been fighting to get back to where we were, and it is hard.
Do you think so? It seems, I don't want to say it seems bleak, but but do you think that there is going to be a plan because you gave very specific things: paid leave, affordable care, child care, retraining? Those are big things.
Yeah.
And they got to get going because women left the workplace, right?
Yeah.
It's not like it's happening. It happened, and now it's good. So, like, do you think progress is happening, or it's going to happen, or what do people need to do? What do we need to do as citizens to make it happen? I guess I'll ask you.
We need to get pissed and vote. I mean, look, it is in Biden's recovery plan, but in his human infrastructure plan, but we all know how that's going. And I don't know. None of us are. I'm not very hopeful. I think we may get pieces on the edges, but I still don't understand how 50% of schools are still not open. Daycare centers are still not shut. Every day you're reading a story about a woman who's leaving the workforce, not because she wants to. And we're talking about being competitive with China and how we're losing the innovation and race. Why are we not 100% just investing in our workforce? I don't get it. Like, I don't know what they're doing over there, right? And over there, I mean in Washington, and why this is a political issue. I see it as a trans-political issue. I think the problem is that, the people that need to fight for it are moms. And we're so damn tired that, and so I've really been thinking about how you solve that problem and thinking about what I'm going to do to do that. Because I think in this moment, we have a once in a lifetime opportunity to kind of fundamentally fix some of these structures. And I think people understand it and get it. And the data is very clear, and that it's only getting worse. It's not getting better. And we can't afford to do that as a nation.
Do you
Forget
think,
about like what's good for women. It's just like we need to put people back to work, like
yeah.
period.
Do you think there's a model somewhere in the world that you think we can look for that you're very impressed with? And you said, wow, they're doing it
I mean,
pretty damn well. Who is that?
Norway, Estonia, New Zealand, Canada. You know what I mean? The child tax credit is interesting because now in July, every family is essentially below a certain amount, but like 98% of families are going to get $300 a month to use whatever they want. So that is like a radical change. That in many countries is called a maternity allowance or child allowance, and that is a radical idea. It seems to have a lot of bipartisan support, and I'm really excited about that. And I would argue that's a down payment on the Marshall Plan. When we were talking about paying moms, people were like, "You're crazy," and then sure enough, 2 months later, we got this introduced. So like that is a big win for the advocacy that we've been pushing. So I want to make sure that gets passed and is made permanent. And I think that will be, because part of what that does, Rob, is it just values the unpaid labor. American women do, the $1.5 trillion almost in unpaid labor that is not accounted for in our GDP. And,
what does that mean specifically?
So like, for example, like, the vast majority of, I don't know what's happening in your house, but like housework, groceries, taking the kids, they're done with, I mean, it's the cognitive labor that every woman does that is still labor, and there's still a value and an importance to it. And that cognitive labor, it's so funny. I've spent so much of my life as an activist fighting for workplace inequity, and I was like, damn, I need to be fighting what was happening in my house. Because if I actually had more time, and if that work was valued, I think I have an amazing husband who is a total feminist. But this is like generational ways of how this is done. If, for example, like 70% of American men take less than 10 days off when their child is born. And like when my husband and I got married, before we had kids, he bought the groceries, cooked, did everything. Like we never had one argument about who was doing what. That started when my son Sean was born. And part of what happened is I had 3 months off and he went back to work. And so we never had that moment as a couple to divide the labor. And so it set off, I think, the relationship, or the equation of care in the wrong way. And so I think as we are thinking about benefits and rethinking this right now, it's not enough for financial services companies to be like, we offer parental leave. It's like, well, actually, how many percentage of your men take it, and how long do they take it? And there's still this expectation, right, that like men shouldn't take it. And it is important for them to take it, not because that time period where you're figuring it out as a family sets the trend that years of therapy can't shift. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard. And so I think so these are the types of conversations that we want to have at the Marshall Plan for Moms. And like, I think it's really important, and why the importance of like valuing domestic work, is in figuring out how you create gender justice. This is what my new book is about. Like, how you create gender justice at home, I think is really critical. And then you'll get to workplace equity.
So gender justice, this is awesome. So let's talk about, gender justice at home. So there's a sense that there's a male female role that we play. And we got that from our parents. Like my father and mother, they're married 53 years until my dad passed away, but it was kind of not old school. It was new stuff, but definitely from the old school, right? And that's what we learn. So I guess if you can dig into that about gender.
Yeah, it's totally what we learn. It's like, what is men's work and what is women's work?
Yeah.
So like most of us, I'm sure when I interrupt my husband, I'm like, but I do the bills. And I was like, right, because that's what you're supposed to do as a guy. But I do all these other things, and I think part of it is just like, again, he's learned from what his dad did, and his dad learned from what his granddad did, and it's been passed. We also live in an American society that doesn't really value that work. I mean, the vast majority of men in power still have women who stay at home. And so, and it goes the other way too. Like, stay-at-home moms are not part of the feminist movement in the way that they should be. when you take a year off of work after you have a baby and you're a woman, you want to go back to the workplace, you lose 40% of your income. So we still judge, right? Women who want to be at home and I think my point is we should let it be a choice. And let it be a choice, we have to value it. And we're paying the price of that. I mean, every article, I'm sure you've seen it, the birth rate of this country is at a 50-year low. You talk to young women today, they don't want to have kids. And they don't want to not have kids because they have an ambitious career or they're lazy. They don't have kids because it's too expensive. And they watch us. And they're like, I don't want that. And so as a nation, we don't want to be Japan. Right. And so we have got to incentivize. I mean, we have to save motherhood. Motherhood is at risk. And
we think it's at risk.
It is at risk. It is very much at risk. And we have to save it. And in order to save it, we have to value it, we have to respect it, and we have to compensate it.
So what can we do as men?
So much. So much. I mean, listen,
because there's this where I just like to not say come clean, but I just think you think there's these roles like, okay, I do this and you do that. And we have to have roles because we both double up on something. We're wasting time. So you kind of like split the roles down the middle, although I love to cook. But my wife does everything else in the home. She's an awesome mom. She gave up her job. She was worked at a hedge fund and to have kids. And it's hard. I think it's very hard. And then I think once you're in the cycle of having kids, it's kind of, you're in this hamster wheel. I don't know how you get out of it.
True.
I don't mean I feel like I'm doing a therapy session with you. But,
no.
But how do you get out of the hamster wheel? Because I think people get stuck in it. And then I'm always concerned that my wife will end up one day being,
resentful.
Not fulfilled. Right. What happened there? Like it was a big blur for 18 years. And where's my life? And while I'm out, I'm living my dream and doing my stuff. But I'm saying like being a mother is an amazing thing. But it's just, it seems like you get on this hamster wheel. That's the way I can describe it.
Yeah, I mean, being a mother's a job. And just like any other job, it gets tiring. It's like you want moments and you want a break, or you want maybe another job, right? And so I think that that's the way that you have to kind of look at it. And I think every woman is different. I think the point is you want this to be a choice. You want to live in a society where you feel like you actually have a choice. And not that this decision is being made for you. What's interesting about moms, even who are moms like your women, your wife, getting a maternity allowance, which in Britain is only £12 a week, which isn't nothing. It's just a validation that I'm working too. Like the slogan that I have is all women are working moms.
I see. So it would give a woman a sense that I'm a working mom. Right. I see what you're saying.
This is like.
This is a job.
This is a job.
I got my job.
And I'm contributing to society. And I have something for me, right? That like gives me my sense of freedom. I think the second piece of this is just, it goes back to the cognitive labor, right? Like what I always say to my husband, like when we go on vacation, I pack the bag, I make sure the baby has their diapers and they're froggy and they're this and they're that. And you get to just get your laptop bag and like walk outside, like must be nice. And so it's understanding all the things that we hold in our head and the mental toll, you know what I mean, that takes. And even if you're privileged or, you have resources, you can't outsource parenthood. And so unless you're a certain kind of person, which I don't think you and I are.
I'm saying, yeah, you could, but you
but
your children are going to be, you're probably going to have problems with your kids somewhere.
Right. So like I always tease, like my husband can have a midlife crisis. I can't. Like, the only time I have time for myself is like right before bed when I pop 2 CBD, turn on my, like my humidifier and like pet the dog to chill out for 2 minutes before I pass out. Like, that's not fun. Like and so I just think I'm in the thick of it. I have young kids. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do next, like, blah, 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 blah. But I think that like really understanding that and valuing that and having a very different societal conversation around it. And we play a role. Like I was talking as I'm writing my book, I said, I do have a little bit of pride when I pack everything and we're on vacation and he says, hey, did you bring the Balm X? And I'm like, oh yeah, I got it right here. Got it. You know what I mean? So like, there's also some amount of pride and like, it's like why we don't let you do things and you do them not well in that. So it's so damn, it's so damn complicated, right? Motherhood, who would have thought, is like so complicated, so controversial, so ready though for a remake, right? Ready for a new, fresh conversation about how we make it work. Because I'm telling you, it is at risk.
So the pandemic brought a lot of change in thinking. Obviously, there's all of last year that we had. There's a lot of very focus on equality, racism. There's just a focus on a bunch of stuff. Do you think focus on women has the same attention as some of the other big things that we're focused on right now? Or it's just, once again, women are women, they're moms, they've left the workforce. It's like, so what? Is it getting the attention you think it should?
I think that women are focused on women.
Okay.
And it's funny, as I'm thinking about what the Marshall Plan for Mom looks like, and I'm thinking about what this movement looks like. What's fascinating, Rob, is like moms have built movements for their kids or for the world. So moms against drunk driving, moms against government farm, moms for climate change, right? But we've never had something for us.
Moms for moms. Yeah, there's no moms for moms.
How crazy is that, right?
Right.
And that's what the Marshall Plan for Moms really is. But what I'm tapping into and what I need to think about how to build is how do you turn populist moms' rage, which is what we feel right now, to hope, to policy, right? And, the reason why we're not getting human infrastructure done is not because we don't have amazing advocacy groups and we don't have a president. We have a president who believes in it. It's because there's not this army of mad as hell moms being like, oh, you better, right? And we need that. When something happens to our children, we show up like that.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Even when something happens to our partners, we show up like that. But we don't show up like that when something's happened, because we've been made to feel like we don't deserve it and we're martyrs and and that has I think that has shifted at this moment, and now it's like, okay, what do we do with that? And I also think the other interesting piece of that, it is kind of clear what we need. And what's wild is I've been putting the data together and doing the polling and the research is that I think there's consensus around race, around age, around economic status. We've had this kind of collective, again, at different levels, experience this past year that has made us recognize, like I always say, like my first title is mom. Like that's the thing that I'm actually the proudest of, that I fought the most for, that I need to own, and like I got 1,000 I'm a feminist t-shirts in my t-shirt. I didn't have one that said I'm a mom. Like it was almost an identity for so long in the workplace we hid everywhere. And I think it's ready to change and shift. And I think it's got to start from us first.
So is that what that's what you're trying to do right now? You're like, I'm going to build, obviously you've done so much on the girls and coding and everything. It sounds like your next project is this. I guess that's what I'm sensing. The Marshall Plan, like you want to define the Marshall Plan. I don't know if that means getting it funded, get the government, but is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. Yes. I think I stepped off as being CEO a couple months ago, so I'm the board chair.
Okay.
And I did that because I really believe, like, as an entrepreneur, sorry, all the entrepreneurs out there, when you're at the 8, 9, 10 year mark, it's time to go. Oh. And
I'm on 25.
Yeah. Sorry. But I think like social entrepreneurs are like entrepreneurs, and like I've learned to muscle.
Right.
And I think someone needed to tap me on the head and be like, what's your next movement you're building? What's the next problem you're building? And I knew if I didn't make myself step off, that I could have like been here forever, because I love my job. I loved my whole identity, my whole life as being the Girls Code CEO. But the minute I opened myself up to that possibility, and I have an amazing woman as COO, and I was like, you're ready, I'm ready, let's do it, is when I found my rage on this topic. And I realized what my next company is, what my next startup is, what my next movement is. And I didn't, it wasn't the plan. Like the plan was to take a second, right? But again, I think, and I knew, and the Marshall Plan for Moms, I wrote an op-ed, it went viral, we built a campaign. I've had 2 bills introduced in Congress, a handful of bills introduced across the state. It changed the president's entire narrative on this. We're getting a child care tax credit down, which is revolution. I mean, holy cow, right? It just went, phew. And the thing is, and it did that because I knew how to do that. because I had done that with Girls Who Code. I'd built a skill set that I could then apply. And it was like my husband always says, like, I'm like Batman who wants to save Gotham. And I now have the car, I have the tools, I know how to do it. And it's been this like a realization that I start telling other social entrepreneurs of like, you can solve other problems. What's the next problem you want to solve? And someone should be tapping you on the shoulder, being like, here's $1 million, go.
You just blow me away. So first of all, I just want to say, like, I was reading about you and looking at some videos, but talking to you, just an extraordinary person. I think it's amazing now that you, as an entrepreneur, was like, okay, I'm stepping down. I've learned a bunch of tool skills, and now I'm going to apply probably to something bigger. It sounds like, you're after something even bigger around something that's obviously very personal, being a mom, being a woman. I always like to ask at the end of the show is like, if you could give, I guess in this case, moms one piece of advice that they could take today with them, what would it be? Besides joining you in your movement, let's say that's a given. What other piece of advice would you give them?
I would say ask for what you need. Ask for what you need. We don't have to be martyrs. And so like in this moment where everyone's thinking about work, you want to go to work 3 out of 4 days a week, demand that. You know what I mean? When you are on a Zoom call and your kid, you got to go pick up your kid, don't apologize. Just go, right? It's like, you don't have to be sorry for being a mom. Like, this world depends on us, period. So I think it's like this opportunity to like redefine and reclaim our power in a really amazing way. And I think similarly, like with girls, and I spent a lot of time trying to teach them that like, you got this. And I think it's the same thing with moms. It's like giving them the permission to be like, yeah, like, no, what's been happening to you is not normal.
Right.
You are okay for being angry, and now what do you want?
Is there a website or somewhere people
can marshallplanformoms.com.
Okay, very good. So sign up for that.
Yes.
Reshma, I just want to thank you for being on the show. Once again, I just think there's entrepreneurs that are making products. There's people like myself, build technology companies, but what you're doing, I call it the social sovereign. It's like you believe in community, but you also believe people should take control of their lives, the sovereignty of like, and this is women taking control of their lives. And I just love it. And I think it's just extraordinary what you're doing. And I wish you the most success. However, I can help out too. And anyone who's listening, go to the website, sign up, and let's support you, because you're right. If we lose our moms, like nobody wants to lose their mom. Like my mom's still alive. You think about your mom. I'm saying that I have my wife who's mother to my children, but nobody wants to lose their mom. The mom and the child relationship. And moms just, I think they bring tenderness to the world. I would say tenderness, this idea of like this, a woman holding her child is like the most powerful image of tenderness. And that image is what, if our world had a lot of that, we wouldn't have half the problems we have.
Great.
So I think if we lose moms, we lose tenderness. We lose tenderness, we're going to lose pieces of our community and the fabric of our society, and just people being, warm, close to each other. So I appreciate everything you're doing in the world, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.